Next up, I'll show you how to use the trigger sensor. The trigger sensor is similar to the range sensor, except it detects with trigger colliders. It's more flexible because you can use any collider shape, but it takes more care to set up. It's helpful to understand how trigger colliders work in Unity. I have my demo scene from the previous video. In that video, I put a range sensor on the sheriff so we can see the thieves when they're nearby. And I gave him a script to chase them and catch them. I recommend watching that video first. I'm going to replace the range sensor with the trigger sensor. First up, I'll remove the range sensor created in the previous video and disable his behavior. This time, I want the sheriff to have a field of view cone which originates from his head bone. So I'll just select the head bone. And create a new game object. And I'll call it eyes. Now I'll add a new trigger sensor component. So the component is displaying a couple of warnings. The first one is that it needs an active trigger collider to detect game objects. So trigger sensors listen for collision events on the same game object. And we need to add one or more colliders to define the detection volume of the sensor. So any shape of collider is okay. I want to use a field of view cone, so I'll add a FOV collider component. This is a utility component in Sensor Toolkit. And notice how it's also added a mesh collider component with the mesh is the FOV collider points. We can get a visualization of the field of view here, and we can adjust these parameters to set the shape. So I'm going to increase the length and adjust the angles so we can see like that, and increase the resolution. Okay. Next, I'll set the detection mode to rigid bodies, since just like in the last video, the thieves all have rigid bodies on their root level game object, and they have colliders on a child game object. Now I want to choose which physics layers the trigger sensor will detect on, and this depends on which physics layers the trigger collider, which is mesh collider, is on. So right now the game object is put on the characters layer, but I want to create a new physics layer and call it sensors. And I want to open the physics manager, and for this sensors layer, I want to disable collisions with all the other layers except for the character layer. I especially don't want this sensors layer to collide with itself. Otherwise, we can find some trigger sensors detecting other trigger sensors. So I recommend that you always have a dedicated physics layer for your trigger sensors, just so you have full control over the layers they can actually detect. And I'll just set that here. Okay, and let's try that. Alright, so it hasn't actually detected anything yet. That's because the sheriff is facing away from the thieves. So if I just rotate him and have a look again. Okay, we see he's detected 2 of the thieves. So these 2 are within the field of view cone. This one's just outside of it. And I will move back like that. And yeah, now they're all within the field of view cone. And let's just re-enable his chasing behavior. So I need to assign the trigger sensor to the sensor parameter, and I'll enable that, and off he goes. There you go. Okay, so he caught those 2, and now because this one's outside of his field of view, he's not detecting it, so he's just going idle. So it all seems to be working. Let me just enable this again. We also can enable line of sight. The line of sight works exactly the same as with the range sensor, so I won't go over all the parameters again. I'll just set blocks line of sight will be environment, and yeah, the rest is okay. Let's try that. If I move this plant in the way, okay. So all of the thieves here, let's take a look. We can visualize all the field of view rays, which were originating from his head and then got obstructed by the plant.